So today's a scorcher outside. I'm huddled in my basement doing some crafting because it's a lot cooler. I'll be going out a little later in the day when it's not as humid out there. As Canadians, we're not used to having like this ridiculous amount of heat. It's like the southern states right now. So I decided I wanted to do a series of videos having to do with knitting. I've been knitting most of my life. And with my memory, I want to make sure if ever I have a hard time remembering something that I can obviously go back and look at these videos. But for those of you who have watched other videos by me, you know that I do a lot of things for charity, right? So I used to loom hats for charity, for example. I do hospice blankets for charity. And I generally weave the hospice blankets with the acrylic yarn, but I also have one on the side that I just regularly knit. I typically, if I'm going to knit projects, I tend to knit small projects because I get very bored very quickly. So I tend to knit like baby clothes, for example, or a bib, or dishcloths, or things like that because they're quick, they're easy. By the time I get bored and want to go on to the next project, it's done. I have in the past knit sweaters for my husband and they look awesome, but you know, by the time I've done half the sweater, it's like, is this done yet? Right now I've been working on this hospice blanket actually since last year. Almost a year I've been working on this thing, and there's no pressure for doing these hospice blankets, and I've woven up many hospice blankets in between, so it's whenever I feel like knitting, I pull it out. But I'm so done with it, right? I'd like to get on to the next one. So I thought what I would do is that those of you who have just started knitting or would love to learn how to knit, just to get some basics down, because there's not a lot that you need to know in order to get started with knitting. Basically, you need to know how to cast on, so that's to put your stitches onto the actual needle. Very different than crochet. Crochet, you have one loop. Obviously, in knitting, you have many loops, depending on the width of whatever your project happens to be. You need to know how to knit. Okay, that's the first stitch you want to learn, is to how to knit. There's a second major stitch, which is to purl, and so you want to know how to do that as well. And then you want to know how to bind off. Whatever you finished, you have to obviously finish it off so that it doesn't unravel. So once you've got those kind of pieces, there is a lot that you can do with it, right? Because a lot of things in knitting are combinations of those things. I mean, there are other things that are more complicated down the road, and we can get into those later, but those, you know, getting comfortable with that is a quick way to be able to, you know, to get your feet wet, basically, and to get started in the hobby. What I did notice, my colleagues and I started a knitting crochet club at school for the kids, and I had in my vision that you'd have a bunch of kids that knew how to knit and crochet, male and female, because we tend to think it's like a female hobby, but it's, you know, there's a lot of males out there that knit and crochet as well, and they do excellent work, and it's cool to see, you know, the colors they pick and the designs that they pick, because they're not, you know, always what a woman would pick. And I didn't get those kind of students in my club. I got a whole bunch of students that did not know how to knit and wanted to learn, and I am a really good science teacher. And biology teacher. I am an appalling knitting teacher, because I'm a person that I can't just face you, look at you, and tell you what to do. Like, I actually need to see what you're doing from the angle as if you were sitting on my lap, which, you know, obviously doesn't work when you're teaching. So we managed to get that down pat, and you know, these videos would have been awesome back then. But the kids got really frustrated really quickly, because they're like, well, you know, why am I practicing how to knit and how to purl? Like, I want to, you know, do, at the time we were doing, you know, hats and things for charity, and they wanted to, you know, to be excellent right away. Now, again, some of that's just being a teenager, but I understand that, you know, you're learning something, like you want something to come out of it, right? So what I would suggest is that I'm going to show you the various stitches, and what I would suggest is that you maybe do, you know, 10 stitches or something, or 15 stitches on a needle, and practice your knitting stitches. and then practice your purl stitches until you get it, because it's the same thing over and over again. It doesn't take long to get into a rhythm for it, okay? There are different ways to hold your needle. I mean, obviously you've seen the way that I use my needles, hold my needles, and again, that may not be comfortable for you for whatever reason. So there are obviously other videos to show you a way that might work better for you. You'll tend to notice that I use metal needles. I've got arthritis. I need lighter needles. I know bamboo needles tend to be light, but for whatever reason, I'm not particularly fond of the feel of them. I do really enjoy using the metal needles. But you know, as you go on, you know, most people's first needles are the, you know, the cheapy plastic ones from the 1970s that I started on, the gray ones, and then you kind of go from there, right, and figure out what you do like and what you don't like. And there are different types of knitting needles out there as well, different companies. You know, you've got double point needles that are used for socks, for example. They don't have an actual kind of nubbin on the end like your typical needles will have. The needles themselves will tell you the width that they are in millimeters, and or the size that they are. Like, you know, is it a size 9 needle? Obviously, the thicker the needle, the bigger the stitches are going to be. So I'm going to use big needles today, bigger than I usually use, because it'll be easier to see on the screen there, and I'm going to use a light colored yarn as a result. The yarn that I'm using does not match the needles that I'm using, okay? So we're going to take a look really quickly on a yarn package there to see what information you can get from there and why that's actually important, okay? Okay, so when you buy a bunch of yarn, this I just picked up at Michael's, basically it's going to give you some information. So I'm not sure if we can see, or is it going to, there we go. All right, so you've got a bunch of information here. So you've got the weight of the yarn, okay? It could be medium, light, chunky, you know, super chunky, that kind of thing. You've got, if you're crocheting, it'll tell you what kind of needle. So in this case, it would be a 5.5 millimeter needle. And they're telling you, they always tell you that you should do some sort of swatch to check that your tension matches what this has, so that you know the product that you're going to get at the end. So the swatch that they're saying is 10 by 10 centimeters. And if I'm using 5.5 millimeter needles, okay, and so basically I should get 17 stitches across, okay, and I should have 23 rows, basically, all right, if my tension is matching theirs. Now, I know for a fact that when I knit, give me a second there, when I knit pretty tight. I've got to be very conscious of what it is, you know, the tension that I use, because I tend to get tighter and tighter. It gets harder and harder to knit because you can't fit the needles into the hole. And, you know, I might have needed something this big, and because I'm actually, my tension is tight, it ends up being like this big, right? So the hospice blanket that I'm doing right now on knitting needles, you know, our hospice blankets are supposed to be between 28 and 30 inches, and anywhere from wide, and anything from 55 to 65 inches long. So I thought, well, geez, how many stitches do I need on my needle for that? And so somebody had said, well, you know, using the needles, I think I had 4.75 needles. I would use larger needles next time, because it's taking a long time. But they said, well, they put on 110 stitches for that. So I'm like, okay, so I put on 110 stitches. I started to knit. It basically ended up, well, I knit a foot before I realized this, and I was measuring, okay, how far have I gone? And I thought, okay, just make sure that's the correct width. And then when I measured the width, I thought, oh my God, I think it was like 21 inches. It's not anywhere near 28 inches. And I was so irritated because it took a bunch of work to do this. Now I'm lucky because I have a friend, Heather, who crochets. And so I'm like, please, Heather, can you possibly crochet like down both sides when I'm done the blanket to make it the width that it needs? And she's like, yeah, no problem. So again, that has to do with the needles I was using. It has to do with the tension that I was using as well, because I am tighter when I knit compared to another person. Okay, so it's something that it is important to just do a swatch, knit the way you normally would, so you kind of have an idea of what it is until you get really, you know, you can predict it, to know what it is that you're doing. So let's do, for example, a cast on. So we're going to cast on. These are 9 millimeter needles. Okay. Now I'm going to show you what we call the long tail cast on. There are various ways to cast on. This is the way I was taught by my grandmother. bless her soul, and basically she's one of the reasons that I'm so artsy-fartsy, I guess. And I've always used it no matter what. I'm sure that there are other cast-ons that are better for depending on what kind of edge you need. Some are stretchy or some are not as stretchy, but this is the one that, you know, start off with and then go from there, okay? So the $1,000,000 question is to figure out that if I want to do, let's say, 10 stitches, how much do I need to start? Because you're not starting at the end and working this way. You are starting here and working that way. And there's nothing more frustrating than putting on, let's say, 110 stitches, and let's say you need 120 and you run out of yarn. So you've got to take everything off the needle and start over from scratch. So I always leave myself a longer amount than I think I need. If I don't need it at the end, it can be easily cut off. Usually you want to leave enough of a tail that you can take a darning needle and then kind of, you know, sew it into the project, then cut it so it kind of gets hidden into the project, right? These are just kind of finishing touches as you get better in knitting, okay? So I'm going to do it this long, okay? I'm going to start from here. So what you're going to do is you want to hold it. Now, again, I'm right-handed. This is my left hand. I'm going to hold it like this, all right? I'm going to put it down here, okay? So you've got a cross, all right? I'm going to pretend that this is my second knitting needle. I know that sounds weird, okay, at the beginning. So you're going to put it in here, okay, where the loop is, all right? Okay, and then I'm going to wrap it between. Now, when you wrap it between the first one, right, because right now this is what it looks like. When I wrap it between, okay, and I bring it here, let's try that again. Whoop. Okay, when I wrap it between, it's going to look like this, okay? But that's just for the first one, so don't panic, okay? So then basically, I can't do this slowly. Boom, boom, boom. Then you're going to go into the hole, okay, on the side of your thumb, and then you pull it, all right? And you don't want to pull it super tight. You should be able to move this thing, okay? If it's too tight, it's going to be a problem, all right? Now, the way the first one is done, you can notice, is that it's not really done, okay? You need to do more than one, okay? So let's do it again. We wrap around, put the needle through, go through, and I usually just kind of go on top like this, all right? That's the first one. And I'm still holding the other one on this side, okay, so that it does not get loose. Now we're going to go do the second one, all right? Do my cross, go through, and you can just hold it like this, wrap around so that it goes between them, all right? Then you get a second one. Do it again. Wrap around, go through, right? Go between, and into the hole. I don't know, you can make one of those stories, you know, like, I don't know, he's going down the path, he's crossing the path, you know, I don't know, like, make a story for yourself to remember the order of it, okay? So we're going to do 10 of these, all right, so let's just do that. Now, you want to make sure that, again, the tension is fairly even. Like, you don't want to make one that's super loose and super tight. You'll be able to tell the difference when you're looking down here, like whether, you know, it doesn't make sense. You want to kind of have them relatively even. And again, they're going to be able to move. You don't want them super loose that they would, you know, come, you know, go off the back, for example. You certainly don't want that. So I'm still holding, right, the long thread with the ball, okay, so it doesn't go anywhere. This is my end here, which is what I'm still using. All right, so there we go. Okay, what have we got here? 3, 6, 9, and 10. Okay? All right, so I've got my 10. So what do you do when you have your 10? All right? So again, I'm going to hold it on this side. All right? My yarn is going to be on the right-hand side. I'm going to be holding the yarn ball part on the right-hand side. When you are doing your knitting, you're going to put it through the hole behind, so you make a cross. Okay? And then basically, you're going to take your yarn that's back here, you're going to put it between the two, all right? So it should look like this, all right? And then you're going to take this tip and go into this hole right here, all right? So there we go, it comes through, and then I'm going to just pull it right off, and it's on this side. And then I tighten it up, not too tight that you can't move it. Let's do it again. I'm going to put the through that hole so that it goes behind, wrap it around so it goes in between, and then I'm going to pull it right through this hole. Okay, boom, done. Let's do it again. Behind, in between, through the hole, pull it off. All right? And you're going to have a little bit here, okay? You don't want to have an excessive amount, okay? So let's do the rest. Now, different people have different methods where they're, like, you'll notice, like, when I do it, I'm manually, okay, I'm manually moving that's how I learned it. I know that some people can just, you know, somehow the thread is on their finger and they're just kind of going, like, weird, and they're not doing a whole lot of movement. Again, if that works better for you, I don't know how to do that, but there are, you know, different methods of doing that, okay, if this one doesn't necessarily work for you. All right, so I've done my first row of knitting, okay? So I don't know if you can see at this point. Let's see here if we can see. Okay. All right, let's take a look. Okay. So on this side, you're going to see V's, a bunch of V's on this side. All right. On the other side, all right, you're seeing a wavy kind of pattern here. I don't know if you can see that. Okay. So if I keep doing knitting on both sides, all right, and that's all I know how to do, is that's the first stitch you want to learn, is to just do knitting, okay? Then basically, if we're going to do that, let me knit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit 3 rows, okay? I'll come back in a moment. I'm going to knit 3 rows so you can see what pattern it is if you are just knitting. Okay. Okay, so I did more than 3 rows because it wasn't really quite showing the pattern I needed. But you can see that if I knit on one side, I flip to the next, I knit on the other side, I flip to the next, you know, back and forth. So as soon as I finish one side, right, I finish one side, I've come to the end, all I do is I turn it around, change hands, and start my knitting again, right? And then when that row is done, again, I will switch hands and then start it again. But you'll notice that it gives these, basically these ridges, okay? And I'm going to do another video that talks about the different types of stitches, like garter stitch. This is what we call garter stitch, stockinette stitch, seed stitch, those kind of things, because they're just literally a variety that uses knit and purl. You know, they might be on different sides, they might be on different parts of the same row, and it just gives different patterns that way. But basically, the stitches are still the same. They're knit and they're purl. Okay? So now let's go on to the purl. Okay? So I took a picture of this so that you could see it obviously better than what I had in the actual camera here. I do not have a state-of-the-art camera to do all the snazzy videos that other people do, because again, these are mainly for myself. So in terms of purling, it's basically very similar, but it's not. So if you notice with knitting, we put it in the back, we made a cross, we brought it around, and we brought it in between, and we put it through the hole, okay? So with purling is you're going to go downwards in front, okay? And then you're basically still putting it in between, all right? But you're wrapping it around, so instead of going in between this way, you're going in between like that, and instead of going downwards into the hole, you're now going upwards into the hole, okay? So let's do that again. So we're going down in front. I usually like to do a cross like that, wrap it around, and then make sure you're bringing it through the hole, right? So you see that you have the yarn is right there, so you're bringing it through the hole right here, okay? So let's do it again. Bring it around, boom, bring it around, all right? All right. And again, you want to leave it loose enough that the stitches will move on the needle. If it's too tight, you're going to be fighting to get it in, and it's going to be tough, and you're going to be fighting to get it in the hole, and it's not going to be enjoyable, okay? So if you're finding that you have that problem, I literally have to keep my hands loose, because as soon as I start getting stressed and going really fast, I get tighter and tighter and tighter. And you'll notice if you're doing something, for example, that's rectangular, it may start going like, you know, more hourglass because you're changing your tension, okay? So down, make your cross, wrap around, all right, boom, and then the last one, okay? And then if I turn it onto this side, all right? so that whenever you're doing your purling, this one always basically will have the stitches. The yarn will always basically be on this side. So I'm going to do a few of the purls so that you can actually see the difference what it is compared to the actual knitted stitches. Okay? Give me a second here. Okay, so as crazy as it sounds, all right, I purled 3 or 4 rows, and you'll notice that the pattern is still the same. It's actually still a garter stitch. So if I knit both sides, I get a garter stitch. If I purl both sides, I get a garter stitch. Okay? Generally speaking, though, a lot of times we'll have something what's called a stocking net stitch. And in another video, I'm going to show you how to do a stocking net stitch, because you're going to basically knit the first row, and when you turn it, you'll purl the second. And that's all you do is knit, purl all the way through, and then you've got no problems there. Okay? So let's now look at basically casting off. Okay? So let's say I've finished this. I don't want to deal with it anymore. Okay? This is my project that I finished. How do I manage to cast off? So let's take a look at that. So cast off, otherwise known as bind off, all right, will give you basically a finished edge so that it does not unravel once you take it off. Okay? So what you want to do is you want to knit the first 2. So I'm going to knit, okay, and I'm going to knit. Done. Now, how do I finish and bind it off? What you do, you can actually take your hook and bring it over. I usually just basically use my fingers. I bring that one over, and it's done. And I just tighten it a little bit, not overly. Now I need a second one to bring this one over. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit the next one. Okay, and then I'm going to take this guy. All right, I'm going to bring him over. There you go. Done. Knit the next guy. Bring it over. Okay. Done. Now let's try it with the knitting needle. It's not typically the way I do it. So you're going to knit the next one. I can take my knitting needle and I hold this one down with my nail and I can bring it over. Boom, done. Same thing. Okay? So whatever works easier for you. All right? I generally just do this and then bring it over. This. Bring it over. There you go. Right? And that's all you're doing all the way along till you get to the very last loop. So let's do that. All right. Bring that over. And then bring this over. Okay, so what you're going to notice is a nice edge. I don't know if you can see it. Okay. Let's see, hopefully. Okay, so you got kind of a nice finished edge there. Let's see if I can take a better picture of that. Give me one second. Okay, so once I was done, I cut it off, all right? And then basically all you do is that I took the needle out, so I make sure you keep the hole, okay? And then I just literally put this, all right, I just feed it through the hole so that it will finally knot it. And now it is cast off. It's not going to unravel, okay? So what I would do if this was my finished product, let me go grab a darning needle and then we can figure out basically how to hide these tails. You're not going to use all of this to sew it in. You're just going to sew in a little portion and then you're going to kind of hide it and then stretch it out and then it gets lost in there. Now keep in mind, okay, the needles that I use were bigger than what I should have used for that for that yarn. So you're going to see obviously bigger holes than you would if I had actually used a 5.5 needle like it was asked for in the actual on the actual yarn package. Okay, so just give me a second. Let me go grab a darning needle. Okay, so the final thing that you're going to do whenever you do a project is that you're going to have these tails and you want to sew them in. You can actually, if you leave these tails long enough and you have to join this with another, with another knitted piece, for example, let's say you're making a sweater and you're knitting the sleeves to the main body of the sweater, then obviously you would use this to sew, for example, if it was long enough so that you don't have to separate and make extra knots for no reason. Now, depending on the type of pattern that you've got in your stitches, the type of stitch you're going to want to use is going to change because sometimes it'll be more visible on a different type of stitch than it would be on this one. So when it comes to garter stitch, I don't do a lot of garter stitch. Keep in mind, again, this is very loose, right? Like we're seeing a lot more holes in here than we ordinarily would have if I'd used the proper size of needles. So what I end up doing is that if you look really closely, okay, in between the curved pieces there, okay, you can see that there's a bunch of V's. So what I'm going to do, all right, is that I'm going to go through the V's, but I'm just going to go under. So for example, right here, I'm going to go under here, under this V here, okay, and then I'm going to go over the other half of the V, and then I'm going to go under the first V of the next stitch, and then over. So I'm just kind of going in and out, all right, and I'm just going to do this for a few. There, okay, there and there, okay, just enough to secure, all right. Now again, this would be tighter. Now I'm going to stretch it out, okay. So what I'm going to do basically, all right, is that if you actually look at it, you really, unless you're looking for it, you're really not seeing, okay, it's blending in with everything else. And then on this side, because the problem with the garter stitch is that it's the same on both sides. So if I had, you know, done something, for example, and I didn't see it on this side, but I could obviously see it on the other side, that would not be good. But again, you're not seeing it. So what you do at the end is that you take it, all right, I'm going to pull just a little bit, all right, I'm going to cut it off, and that way when it stretches back to its regular size, okay, it's hidden inside. You don't have a tail sticking out anywhere. Okay. Now again, it is possible, right? I didn't weave it very far in because it wasn't a big piece. But again, it is possible that all I need to do is I could just pick it out and it could come right back out the tail. Okay. So again, if that's something that bothers you, I could have gone up another level, gone back through those V's, for example, just so that it make it harder for the tail to find its way out. Okay. So I hope that helps get you started. As I said, I would recommend just practicing the knits, and once you finish practicing the knits, you can, you know, undo it, because just removing the stitches, it'll all unravel. Practice your purls, practice your cast-ons, like do it all separately, and then just do little swatches, okay, nothing huge, just little swatches, and then when you feel confident, you go on to the next step of maybe different patterns, actually trying different projects, and things like that, and down the road, I'm going to be making more videos having to do with that. All right, so have yourself a great day, and I hope it helped.